Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Q&A Cafe for Business by Design. Today is Wednesday, November 25th. Thank you for joining us for our customer contracts topic with Chris Hogan. He is here to present to you about this topic. So thank you so much for being here. Just to let everyone know, everyone will remain on mute for the duration of the session. I will be recording this session, and then it will be sent out about 2 days after. So on Friday, it'll be sent out through the GoToWebinar tool, and you'll get it there, and you can review it if you'd like. And we also upload it to our YouTube channel. We have a training series for ByDesign, and all of our other recorded Q&A cafes are there for your viewing pleasure. What else? Next Wednesday, same place, same time, we have supply chain visibility in SAP Business ByDesign. Looks like a very popular topic, so please make sure that you register for that. Registration details are on our website, always under the resources page. Scroll all the way down, and that's where all of our upcoming Q&A cafes are. Also, you'll get that registration link in the email that is sent out 2 days from now. So without further, oh, and one more thing, if you have questions, please again, leave yourself on mute, type them into the questions box or the chat box, and I'll help Chris facilitate those near the end of his presentation. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand it over to Chris Hogan, and I will mute myself.
All right, thanks, Kayla. I just wanted to confirm before I get started. Kayla, can you see the screen that I'm presenting there?
Yes, I can. It says agenda, SAP Business ByDesign, customer contract. Okay.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Kayla, and thanks for everybody for joining us on this call here. Like Kayla mentioned, my name is Chris Hogan. I've been with BizDB for about 10 years. I'm going to take you through today SAP Business ByDesign, specifically customer contract management. What you can see there is a list of topics that we're going to go through. I've got about 30 slides to go through. There's a fair bit of kind of, just kind of topics that I need to get through, but I do want to save some time at the end to do some demo and take you through some of that stuff. So I will move through the slides probably at a bit of a quicker pace, but hopefully enough that you can keep up. If you have any questions after the call, don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Kayla, and we can fill in any gaps that we might not have explained clearly or that you need some follow-up on. All right, so with that, let's get started. So what's the purpose of customer contracts? Really simply, a contract represents a negotiated agreement between you, the supplier, and the customer for services and products that are going to be provided at a later date. A contract is valid for a specific time frame. It's got its own pricing and terms. And a really key point around contracts, again, just reiterating here, is the later date. So the customer knows what they want, but they don't necessarily know, and you don't necessarily know when they're going to need that. They just know what they need over this specific time frame. So a contract is going to be fulfilled on an as-needed basis. Different than a sales order where you have the sale from a sales order and the customer's buying, and you're going to fulfill that and ship that out, as soon as you can. So the contract really fits this need for this, time-based agreement for the sale of services and products, but more on a fulfillment on an ad hoc or as-needed basis. The contract allows for invoice schedules to be set up to handle spreading out the invoicing when it comes to fixed price basis, and also have its own price agreements for time and materials items. There's automation in the system that helps with the renewal of contracts as well as the cancellation of contracts. And there's also functionality that you can utilize to sell standardized contracts out of a sales order. So there's a lot here. We'll be kind of stepping through some of these topics in more detail in the following slides, but this gives you a gist of what the purpose of the customer contract is for. So with that understanding, when would you use a customer contract? Well, it really depends on the business scenario. On the left-hand side are the 4 main business scenarios that ByDesign currently supports or fulfills. And we'll see this kind of chart a couple times throughout the presentation. Each one kind of has a different focus. The one right now is really focused on, when you would use it. So if we look at on the first column there, The first one is an agreement to provide services to your customer over a predefined time period for a fixed price, and you're going to invoice them one time upfront in full. What might be some examples of that? Technical support, service agreements, they might go by different names for you, maintenance agreements. The other three columns, fulfilled, priced, invoiced, those ones is really just to, kind of summarize easily, so you kind of look at these ones after you go through them. You can kind of stack them up side by side and see, where the similarities and where the differences are. But for right now, we'll just go through these two columns here. The next business scenario that we're talking about is an agreement to provide services to your customer, again, over a predefined time period, and again, for a fixed price. But the difference with this one compared to the first one is that you're invoicing on a recurring basis. So it might be monthly, quarterly, annually, different than this one where you're invoicing upfront. So what might be some examples of this type of contract? Managed services, subscription services, software as a service, software that's sold on a monthly basis. When you look at the next scenario, this one here is about an agreement to provide service to the customer, again, over a predefined time period, but here it's being invoiced on a time and materials basis. Some examples here might be, maintenance agreements. We saw that out here. Really, the difference here is just in terms of, how the invoicing is handled. In this case, it's going to be on a time and materials basis. A warranty extension, maybe you had a warranty that was in place or an agreement that was in place to provide, service, and they want to extend it, and your terms for that are that it would be extended, but on a time and materials basis. The last one is an agreement that provides the customer the right to purchase specifically material and product at a set price and up to a particular quantity over this predefined time period. Some examples of that might be where, a large volume or a material sale of value, but it's, not known exactly when the customer is going to place that order. It's just over agreed time period that they will, maybe for raw materials or input products. Those would be a couple of examples. So now we've gone through, those four kind of main business scenarios. If we just kind of recap, some of the differences between them, you'll see here the fulfillment. You'll see, right, this is all as needed. So we've got the agreement in place. The customer knows, what they want, but they don't know when they're going to need it. And that's where the fulfillment is all going to happen basically when the customer calls or, when they reach out to you for service or for that sales order. Here, just summarizing the different ways in terms of how it's going to be priced. So these two were fixed price. This one here is time and materials. And this one here, the pricing is specifically driven from the contract. In terms of when it's going to be invoiced, the main difference here between these two fixed price contracts was this one here was being invoiced upfront in full. This one's going to be on a recurring basis. Again, maybe it's monthly, quarterly, annually. And then these two here are basically after it's been fulfilled. So with that understanding, we'll move forward and look at this in terms of these four scenarios and what does the document flow look like in ByDesign? And what I mean by document flow is essentially, what are those transactions that you're creating in the system to basically carry out that specific business scenario. So the document flow in ByDesign is really going to depend on which business scenario is applicable to you and also what the requirements are. What I mean by requirements are you carrying out this business scenario, and do you need to capture what I'm calling with actual? So do you need to capture the actual time or the actual quantities involved? Or is it really more just an invoicing exercise where you just need to have the invoicing generated, but you're not capturing the actuals? So one example where you might have a document flow when you're not using actuals would be here. Think about like that monthly subscription of software as a service. That would be one example. So we're going to step through these. I won't cover this in a lot of detail. We're going to see this a couple of times, and we'll go through it in more depth. Just before we go any further, here I was showing you the document flows here. You can see everything starts from contract. So that's not exactly true. I just did it like that to keep it simple. But really, the ByDesign also does support integration with its customer relationship management processes. So for a new contract, you could start from opportunity if you're using that in your company and carry it to a quote and then to a contract. You could skip the opportunity and start right from the quote. And if none of that's relevant to you, you can just start right from the contract. When it comes to doing upsells to an existing contract, so that would be where you have a contract and you're going to make additions to it. Here too, you can do the upsell and you can carry it forward to a quote contract, merge that into the existing contract, or even if you needed to, generate that as a new separate contract. We won't be going into really any depth in terms of the quoting side of it. We're going to spend all our time focused on kind of the contract, creating it and then executing it and invoicing it. But a lot of what we go through with the contract is really almost identical for how you would do the quote for contract. And then the rest of the CRM processes really aren't that different at all. So what are the key elements of a customer contract? I say key elements. Here I'm kind of referring to, if you're familiar with a number of documents in ByDesign like sales order or service order, there's a lot of similarities between those documents in terms of, the tabs that you'll see along the top. Once you get into the tabs like items, the line level details, there's a lot of similarities. For contract though, some of the key differences that are important are the ones that are listed here. So on a contract, you'll have this contract start date and end date. That's important because it defines the term, the valid period or the validity period of the contract. The contract date represents when the contract was signed. Over here, you have the contract administrator. Why this is really intended to represent, whereas the employee responsible is the salesperson that sold the contract, but the contract administrator is the person who's going to be responsible for essentially overseeing it when it comes time for renewal or cancellation. We'll see a little bit later in terms of, when you set renewal rules up and the automation, it's the contract administrator who's the person who's notified about those expiring contracts or upcoming renewals. Once you get into, once you've kind of filled out the main information, a lot of this, very similar, like I said, the customer account, contacts, and kind of stuff that you'll see typically on a sales order. Once you've filled out that area of the main information on the contract, the next place that you'd be going is the renewal and cancellation. So you can see now on the screenshot over here on the right-hand side, there's details for specifying renewal agreement and cancellation agreement. We're going to go through in more detail what that's all about. But essentially, if you have a formal structured process for renewals of contracts and for cancellations of contracts, setting that here is what helps the system drive those processes so that it's processed correctly. Once you get into the items tab, and we'll see a couple of screenshots later that have details on this, really a lot of similarities to sales order, but kind of key differences are listed here. So the types of items that you can put on there, entitlement, that's probably a new word for a lot of you folks on the call, so we'll go through that in detail. But you can put services, materials, and expenses just like a sales order. So we'll go through and we'll see examples of that. The item group, we're going to see that a little bit later. That's important. If you're not familiar with that already, that's not specific to a contract. You'll see that on a sales order, service order. That's really key to driving how the document and how the lines in the document flow through the system. When I was talking about document flow, it's that setting on the document that indicates, what that next step is in the system for that particular line. We'll talk about entitled products and price agreements. Covered products, we're going to talk about covered products and how that's important to contracts, and then pricing and invoicing. So how do you create a customer contract? There's four main ways. You can create it manually using a template. I mentioned already that you can sell a contract from a sales order, and you can also create it from Microsoft Excel. So when it comes to creating a contract manually, we've talked already about some of these fields on the main information, but you'd navigate yourself over into the sales order work center and create new contract. And on the contract screen, these fields here we've talked about already that you'd fill out are kind of the main differences for the fields. Otherwise, I think a lot of people on the call would be familiar already. If you're working with other documents like sales orders or service orders, you're already familiar with filling in the account, general information, an external reference or PO number if that was relevant, contact at the customer, and then just information in terms of within your organization, how it's assigned to the sales employee and sales unit. You can also create contracts through a template. So a lot of, essentially, most of what we've talked about so far in terms of the fields in the general tab, the fields in the item, renewal and cancellation and covered products, all of that can essentially be put into a template. And that template is then able to be used when you're creating a new contract rather than key in all of this information every single time. You can click a button to create the contract from the template, and essentially takes all of that information in the template and drops it into the contract, leaving you just to kind of update maybe quantities or some other details so you can finish out the setup of the contract. So it really accelerates the creation of the contract. The contract template is also a key piece to that functionality that I've mentioned for being able to sell a contract out of a sales order. We'll see that coming in a couple of slides. But that's key for that. And that's when I was talking about a standardized contract that you're selling out of a sales order, it's really that template that's driving that standardized contract. So here is where we get some more details on the creation of a contract from a sales order. Really, once you've set the contract template up, really what's left for you to do, and I've highlighted the differences here in the contract template screenshot you can see here. I'll just go back one screen. Here I've highlighted a lot when you're first creating the contract template. There's a lot that you need to fill in terms of the validity, renewal agreement, cancellation, the items, etc. Here I'm highlighting just the main differences. Now that you have that template in place, if you wanted to then use that template for driving the creation of a contract from a sales order, really the only other couple things that you need to do are the ones that are highlighted here. What you'll first need to do is create an entitlement. An entitlement is a type of item like a service is or like a material is, but it is its own type of item in ByDesign. And we're going to see a little bit later, exactly what an entitlement is. But for right now, you can think of it essentially as a lightweight service, really just describing a right for the customer to receive a service or receive a product at a later date. So we create this entitlement, and that entitlement has to have a specific item group on it. It specifically has to have this one here called entitlement contract sale. Otherwise, the rest of the setup for the entitlement would be very similar to a service. It's really this item group that's key. Once you've created that entitlement, the next step is on the contract template. You'll take that entitlement and you'll populate it in here, indicating that this contract is going to be sold through an entitlement. And then you'll enter the sales organization and the distribution channel that this contract template is specific to. Once you've done that and you've saved that, really now that's all that's left is on your sales order, you will then be able to go and enter in a new line item, just like you would any other line item on your sales order, but by entering in this entitlement, this one up here, as a line item on your sales order, it uses the distribution, the sales organization and distribution channel already on your sales order and the entitlement you've entered to essentially go and look up what that matching contract template is. And so in the background, it now knows what that template is. So when you finally take the sales order and release it, it'll generate a new contract in an in preparation status, which is kind of like a draft status. But it creates that, carrying all the information forward from the sales order that it can and the contract template, so that you don't have to go and manually create it. The last way of creating a contract is through Microsoft Excel. It is actually very basic. You don't have a lot of access to a lot of fields. I would say, it could still be useful if you've got a contract that's got a lot of line items. So you can see down here, I've exposed all of the columns. There's really only 4. So I could see it being still really useful if you've got a lot of line items in the contract, just because that could be a quicker way to get your contract created, populated on screen, and then you can go and update on screen as you need. So it might still be useful there. It's really simple to do. And from the sales orders view, you simply click New Contract from Excel. What that'll do is in your browser, in the bottom kind of corner, you'll see an Excel sheet downloaded. If you click that Excel sheet open, assuming that you've already downloaded and installed the SAP Business ByDesign Excel add-in, then you'll just be able to open up that Excel workbook and click the Log On button, and essentially you'll see this template that's here. You can fill in the information once you've got it all filled in. You just have to click Save Data, and it'll go on and create the contract with the information that you put into the template. If you don't have the SAP ByDesign Excel add-in, don't know where to find it, you can find it right in the Home Work Center under Self-Services. There's an area where you can go and download those add-ins like Microsoft Excel, the same place that you would look to get directed to downloading the SAP mobile apps. So we're still on the topic of kind of, when we're creating a contract, these key pieces that we need to be aware of and fill in. We've kind of gone through already the main information. We've talked about a little bit about items and the types of things we're putting in there. We're going to talk now about renewals and cancellation agreements. So the renewal agreement, this is something that you don't have to put on a contract. You can leave it totally blank. And what that means is if you were to leave it blank, then there's no rule in place that's going to help the system in any kind of automated way help you drive the renewal of that contract. It's all going to be done manually. If you do have a formal contract renewal process though, and formal I should probably say more like structured, like if you've got certain types of ways that contracts should be renewed depending on the types of contracts that they are, you can define those what we call renewal rules, and we'll see that in the next slide, the definition of a renewal rule. And then when you create the contract, you can select that renewal rule, and essentially that is created on the contract's header. It applies to all the line items on the contract and helps drive the renewal of that contract. So the renewal rule is where you would select the renewal of that rule that's applicable to this contract. Details is just where you can put some additional text. Unfortunately, there's no text that doesn't get populated from the renewal rule. This is just free text on the contract itself, but will be descriptive just to help you, capture some additional information specific to this contract and its renewal. The reminder field here is where you enter in how many days in advance before the end of the contract you would want the system to send a reminder. This reminder is sent through a business task by design. And so it'll be a task that gets created and generated, in this case, 45 days before the end of the contract. And it's a task that will be sent to the contract administrator. The contract administrator was one of those fields on the main information when you were first setting up the contract. The contract validity period, this is just a calculated field here. Kind of nice to see that, based on the contract start and end date that you had put on the main information, just showing you what the validity period, how long the contract is valid for. And based on today's date and those contract dates, start and end dates, how many days are left in the contract. So that's essentially the kind of main stuff that you need to be concerned about if you're setting up a renewal agreement or renewal rule in the contract. These 2 points here talk more about, when it comes time to renew, like how does that work? What does it look like? So just, in summary, basically the way, and we'll see in the next slide some more details on it, but basically when it comes to renewal, you kind of have two options. You can create the new contract either as a follow-up document that's a contract or a quote for contract. So here in this case, you're creating a brand new document, or you can create these the renewals as basically new line items within the same contract. So for example, if this was contract 246 and we're going to use this option, rather than a new contract, it would take copies of the existing lines and basically create a copy, a new set of lines, but have those lines extended out for the renewal period. If you do choose this option, it does actually also update, obviously the the end date of your contract. So that's the main difference between the two. When it comes time to renewal, really how the renewal is going to be processed through the system, again, is determined by whatever you select in this renewal rule. If there's no rule selected, which is totally valid, it means that you're going to entirely handle it manually. There's no help from the system. If there is a rule selected, I'm going to call it semi-automated. There's a lot of things that it'll do for you or can do for you based on how you define it. Either way, essentially, the renewal, what it comes to is the follow-up document or the lines will get created. It really just comes down to picking up that renewal contract of those lines, reviewing it, updating it, and releasing it, and that becomes the renewal. So if we go into a bit more detail about these renewal rules to understand, what kind of things can the system do to help the contract administrator help you with the correct renewal of a contract. In business configuration, so that's an area in ByDesign that only the administrator, or what we call the key user in ByDesign, would have access to, or maybe a couple people in your company. But so now we're looking here at more like that configuration area. But this is really helpful to understand how the renewal rules work and how they help you. So here we're focused just on renewals. We're first setting over here auto renewals. That's the one over here. So really what auto renewal is all about is indicating to the system whether it should automatically create the renewal according to whatever other settings you have down here. But if it should automatically create that, or if it's going to be left for the user to manually create. You can see here, so the one that we're looking at here is this rule, this custom rule has been created Z21, auto renewal for 1 year, reprice with new contract. So here we have it that the system is going to automatically create the renewal based on these other settings here. The section over here, the on renewal create, that's where you indicate when the renewal is going to be processed. You can either have that when it comes time for renewal, do you want to have it create a quote or a contract? So here we're seeing a contract. If this was selected on quote, I'll just talk to basically two options, but they're very similar. If it were that we had it selected, quote for contract, you have an option to, do you want to auto submit the contract? And basically what that setting is all about is, do you want to have the system create the contract in this in preparation draft status, i.e. you would not want to auto submit it in that case, so it would just create the quote in preparation. You could then pick it up, review it, do what you need to do, and then finally submit it. Or do you want to have the system create the quote and actually submit it? Just like if you had gone in and clicked the submit button to send it for internal approval, and once it was approved, then it would be able to be sent off to the customer. So that's what that's all about. And then the other setting under the quotes is really around the advanced creation. So similar to the one here for contract, essentially like how far in advance before the end of the contract do you want that that creation of the quote to occur. So now if we weren't doing a quote, we're doing a contract instead. So we've got these three settings here that we see. Auto release. So auto release is where we would indicate whether the renewal is going to be a renewal contract or item should just be created or saved in preparation or released. So kind of similar to what I talked about with the quote being created in preparation. Here it's just talking about the creation of a contract. So do you want the contract to be created and then released as now an actual enforced contract? Or do you want it to be created just in preparation? So here what we're seeing is it's unchecked. It would create, in this case, the contract just in preparation so that you could pick it up, do what you need to do with it to get it all finalized, and then you could manually release it. The next setting over here, create new contract. This is where you indicate whether it should be created as a new contract or that you want it to be created as line items within the same contract. So that was on the previous slide where we talked about those kind of two main options. That's where you control that. And then the last setting there, the advanced creation duration, we already talked about that, is really just how far before the end of the contract do you want this creation activity to occur? So don't confuse this with the reminder. Like on the contract, there was that reminder period. The reminder drives, how soon do you want a renewal task or alert to be sent out to the contract administrator? And this one here is driving how soon before do you want the creation of the contract or new contract line items to be created. Regardless of what you pick over here on, kind of when the renewal is going to be created, the upper section over on the right, renewal decisions, is more about how you want it to be processed. And really, these have to do a bit more with, around cancellations. So I think a lot of these ones here are kind of self-explanatory. The first one here is around, stop renewal on the header of cancellation. It's really just, it only applies if the contract's going to be selected and if you indicate that the renewal is going to be a contract. And you would not want it to be renewed if the contract is canceled. So maybe there's cases where you would still want to create a renewal even though it's canceled. And if that was, valid for you, that's how you can control that. This is the setting very similar. It's on a line item level though. So you can control whether or not the line item should be renewed based on what their cancellation status is. The next setting over here, redetermine price. It's where you indicate whether the renewal should keep the same prices that are on that previous contract, or if, when the new contract or quote for contract is created, if you want the system to go and basically refresh the pricing based on current sales price data. And then the next setting is related. It's essentially, kind of the same thing in terms of repricing, but whether it should update the pricing date on the contract, or it should use the existing date that's on the previous contract. The last one there, renewal duration, is really about what's the term for the renewal period. So here it's shown as 1 year. You might have, the original contract maybe is for 3 years, and then after that, every renewal period you want to be 1 year. So that's how you would control it here. I think that's what the renewal period would be. Now, kind of, switching gears and talking about the cancellation. The cancellation agreement in the contract and by design, what you see over here, the cancellation rule, this doesn't really drive any automation. It's more informational. So unlike the renewal, you saw with the renewal rule there is the possibility for a lot of automation that can be driven. The cancellation rule, you can define in business configuration your own cancellation rules. And basically, they're just descriptive, meaningful text to you, so that on this contract, when the customer calls in and says, hey, they'd like to cancel the contract, this is informational to you to let you know what was the agreed, cancellation agreement. And you can put additional details here. So that's really just, to guide you when they call in. The next field down here, the minimum contract validity. This is where is an optional field. It's where you specify, what is the minimum period that the contract has to have run before it would be possible for the customer to cancel it. The system does not enforce this. It's just informational, and essentially just it helps calculate down here the minimum contract validity end. Basically, just a date telling you, what is that, date that it would have to be passed before we would consider it being able to be canceled. But again, nothing's driven by the system to enforce this. It's all informational. The fields down below the cancellation are used when the cancellation event, is actually going to take place. So when your customer calls in and says, for whatever reason, that they're not going to be continuing with the contract, in the first field here, cancellation received on, that's where you would put the, the actual date that they called. The cancellation requested for is where you would put the date when they're wanting it to be canceled for. So let's say, for example, the customer called in today, we would put today's date, here, but if they wanted to be canceled as of the end of this month, we would put the end of the month into the requested for. The next field we can capture in the cancellation reason. This is a list that you can maintain, reasons that would be meaningful to you and your business. So these fields here can all be filled in and don't really drive anything, they're just capturing information. These two fields down here are the ones that really make things happen. Once you've received that request from your customer for the cancellation, it's really up to you, based on the cancellation rule, the validity period, what they're asking for down here in terms of the requested cancellation date. If your business decide to honor the cancellation, it's valid, then you would go and you would put in what is the date that the system should cancel the contract. And if you decided that it wasn't going to be, it's not within the terms of being able to be canceled, then you would not put anything in here. So the key field here for making anything happen by the system is the cancellation effective one. If you are going to be canceling the contract, you'd also want to pay attention to invoice cancellation. That's where you're telling the system, how should you handle any outstanding invoices that are out there. So for example, a fixed price contract over a year, multiple years, how should those future invoice requests that are sitting there scheduled to go, how should they be handled? Should they still be invoiced, or should they be canceled? So once you set the cancellation date here, there's really not more that you need to worry about. Essentially what the system is going to do, the contract's still valid until that date is reached. Once that date is reached though, the system will update the cancellation status. So we see it down here. It'll actually update the cancellation status in the background, and it'll set the contract end date to be 1 day before that cancellation effective date. And that's all automated, kind of a background job that runs on a daily basis in the background. I guess the last thing on cancellation, let's just say that same scenario that you had your customer call in today, they wanted it canceled at the end of the month. So you went ahead, went through all of that and put in the cancellation date end of the month, saved it, closed it. They call it tomorrow in a panic and they're like, you know what, we've changed our mind, we don't want to cancel it. Can you undo that? That's totally fine too. You can go in at any point before this date is reached, and you can remove the cancellation date, and then that'll kind of disable any cancellation activity that this system might have done once it reached that date. Okay, so still on the topic of kind of creating a contract and those kind of key areas, a couple more that we need to get through. We're going to go through in a little bit more kind of what it means, covered products, entitlements, entitled products. But first one I wanted to start out with an example that I think helps explain what they are and how they relate to each other. So let's say that you are, you've sold to your customer a printer, and with that printer, you've given them a protection plan that gives them support. And when they need that support, they're only able to call in or get that support through a couple different means. And specifically in this case, they can get remote support and only by email and phone or by on-site support. So in this example, the terminology that ByDesign uses, the covered product is the printer. So you sold a printer, the contract is going to be covering that printer. The entitlement, the right that the customer has to some service or product in the future, that's the protection plan. The entitled products, really what that is, it's the bundle of things that are eligible within that entitlement. So within the protection plan here, it's that the customer is able to get remote support and on-site service. So we'll just dig into those a little bit more. The covered product, so mentioned here, so you're going to see it over here, covered products. And so this indicates the products that the contract's going to cover. You can see on the screen here, there's a number of different options. Really what it boils down to is you can indicate that the contract's going to cover essentially everything. So if you check this box, you're not worried about what type of product ID, you're not worried about what type of product category or a specific serial number. It just covers all the customer's current products, current and future. If you want to uncheck that though, and you did want to limit the coverage of the contract, then you've got basically a mix of 3 different ways that you can have that coverage. So you can specify just a product category. You see that in the second line here, so 191. You can specify a specific product. So maybe it's a non-serialized product. or you can specify a specific serial number, and you can do a combination of them. Now, the covered products topic, so you'll see this if it's been configured, the configuration's turned on, you'll see this in your contract. But a really important thing to understand with the covered products and the entitlements and the entitled products is, and you'll see as we go through, we get to the kind of workflow, the document flow again, it's really only relevant if you're going to be using the service request as part of your process. If you're not going to be using the service request, you could use the covered products more for informational purposes, but there's nothing really in the system that's going to be later used by it, because it's with the way that the functionality currently is in ByDesign, it really is the service request that utilizes the covered product, so that when the customer calls in and you write up your service request, you can put in the product, the serial number, and it'll help limit basically and help guide you to the right contract that you specify on that service request. Entitlements. So again, remember, this is that right that the customer has to receive the service or product at a later date, different than services or materials that you would sell, and those are set up in the product data. These entitlements, so they are their own type of item in ByDesign. They're created in the same way that you would create a service or a material. I had mentioned earlier, we kind of think of them as a lightweight service. So they look and feel like a service, but they got quite a bit less information. Really, the kind of key things on the service, once you've specified a description of the service, product category, unit of measure, that kind of stuff. The kind of key thing that you get down to is the item group. So there's a couple different item groups that you can have for entitlement. And so basically it's going to be, whether it's fixed priced with actuals or fixed price without actuals, time and materials, or that special one that we talked about that allows you to use it on a sales order. So the entitled products, remember our printer example, this was where we had, under the protection plan, there's only certain things that were able to be, that could be provided through that protection plan. So that's where the entitled products, where you specify that on the contract. It's only relevant for an entitlement line. So, imagine here line 10 is our protection plan. So on our contract, we've got our protection plan. Then you can specify under that entitlement, what are the entitled products. And so you see here, there's a specific one listed as repair. So really what that drives is that, and again, relevant to kind of the service workflow when you're using service confirmations, it drives the items that are able to be selected and put onto your service confirmation, as you can see here. So earlier I mentioned service request and service confirmation. So they are two different documents. So service request we'll see a little bit later is about some documents and workflow that you can use in the system, basically just to capture documentation on the request itself and how the request was fulfilled. Whereas service confirmation for the customer contracts is one way that you capture actuals. So in this case here, the entitlements and the entitlement products, the service confirmation does come into play in certain business scenarios, depending on if you're going to be capturing actuals, and we'll see that in more detail a bit later. Still on the topic of entitlements, price agreements. So only on price agreements, though, that are time and materials, you can specify additional pricing specific to the entitlement products or the items on the contract. And so basically what you're able to specify is that if there should be a different list price, or if there should be a discount. And these will be taken into account when you're creating a service confirmation. Price per period is a way that you can set the invoice when the invoice schedule is used on a fixed price contract, rather than have the system calculate the value on the invoice lines to be based off of quantity times price. Instead, you can say that you want it to be based off a certain time period. So in this example, rather than say that you want it to be 12, 1 out of 12 times whatever the net price is, you specifically want to use the unit of measure of 1 month and $1,000 over the whatever the invoicing time frame is. So we can see down here the system is going to be set up with an invoice schedule on a monthly basis. It's going to be using, in this case, with the price period, it's going to be using the 1 month and the $1,000 instead of calculating using quantity. Invoice schedules, this comes into play if you're not going to be invoicing upfront. So for example, a fixed price contract, you're not going to be invoicing upfront, and you're going to want to spread the invoicing out over the contract term, whether monthly or quarterly or annually or whatever it is that you want. Invoicing schedule is how that's maintained. In the background, there's a job that runs and will automatically generate invoice requests for those fixed price items. Its default is 3 days. That is configurable. You can have it be more than that. But basically, it's the time horizon that it's running in the background and looking, are there any invoice requests within the next 3 or X days to be created, and it'll create those. Fixed price items on contracts that don't have an invoice schedule, they work, they'll create the invoice request right away for the entire contract amount upfront. Okay, so creating a customer contract, and I can see that we're getting near end of time, so I'm thinking we're not going to have time for the demo, but we'll make it through the rest of the slides here to give you just an understanding of how to execute and how to invoice the contract. So here again, we see this chart. So we're kind of through the kind of main topics for the creation of contract and what those key areas are. So we come back to the business scenarios now and look again at the business scenarios. Well, once you've got the contract created, like how do you actually perform the execution or the fulfillment of the contract? So here again, it depends on what your business scenario is and whether you need those actuals or not. So I've highlighted in bold the areas that come into play when you're talking about the execution of the contract. And so if we talk here about this first example, this one here was about providing services, predefined period, fixed price, invoiced all up front. You can, if you didn't want to capture any actuals, then basically the contract will be created. And because there's no invoice, like in this case, there would be no invoice schedule. We saw that kind of on the previous slide. That's what's going to drive generating the invoice all up front. If you did want to capture actuals, and you still can, you can see here that the contractor will be generating the invoice. That'll all happen up front. And then follow-on activities can be, you could create a service confirmation, you can create service request, and then confirmation or project. And we'll see some details about that in a little bit. When it comes to the following scenario, basically you remember that again, the main difference between these two is that here we're invoicing on a recurring basis. This is identical. There's really nothing different between these two here. Nothing different between these two here. The only difference really is how the invoicing is done. In this case, there's an invoice schedule that's set up to spread the invoicing over month, quarter, whatever the time frame is, whereas this one, there wasn't. This one here is we're providing services over a predefined time period, time and materials. So when contracts are used on a time and materials basis, remember I was talking earlier about service confirmation, service request. This is where service confirmation is mandatory. You'll see here, there's no way to do this particular business scenario without actuals, and that's because the service confirmation is where you're going to say, how many hours or how many quantities of, what materials or parts were consumed. And you do that from the contract. You confirm execution to create a service confirmation, and it's those hours and quantities that service input into the invoice. The service request, we'll see just in a following slide. It's not required. It's an optional step that you can do if you want to, capture details in the system about what the request was, how it was troubleshooted. You may though have, an external system that does better what you need. But if you don't, there's capabilities within ByDesign that can capture that, but it's not required. And then the last scenario down here in terms of the execution, this is where you had a contract that you're going to you got an agreement with your customer for that they're going to buy, product over a specific time frame. Just don't know exactly when. So here, after the contract's created, you're able to create a follow-up sales order. And then from the sales order, it's just your typical outbound delivery logistics processes, as would be with any sales order for the execution. So just a bit more detail on kind of those steps. So service request. So this was back over here. Service request comes in. You could be using up here, and up here. Really, the service request, those really only, as it mentions here, is really only if you want to document and categorize the service requests that are coming in, with your calls and your customers, your emails, how the troubleshooting took place. If you don't already have a system to do that, the steps are essentially you will go to the service desk work center. You'll create a new service request. You'll assign it to an employee within your company. They're able to go and if you wanted to maintain a knowledge base within the system, there's a knowledge base functionality that you can look and search and link knowledge base articles to this service request. You can capture notes in terms of the troubleshooting that was done. There's categorization in terms of what type of issue it is. Essentially, what the goal of the service request is really just to capture all of that troubleshooting and dialogue, and then moving the service request to a resolved completed status. This whole thing really just has to do around the documentation and categorization of the resolution of that request. It has no integration at all to invoicing, so it's totally optional. The service confirmation, however, it's optional or mandatory, kind of depending on your business scenario. So if you were doing time and materials on contract, recall this where we mentioned that this is mandatory because that's the only means that the system has on a time and materials type of contract line item to know what were the hours, what were the quantities that were confirmed, and it uses those as input to invoicing. On a fixed price contract, if you wanted to, you could utilize the service confirmation to capture the hours and then just capture the hours materials from a cost perspective, but it would not drive any kind of invoicing because in that case, in a fixed price, the invoicing has already been handled by the contract. To create a service confirmation is really simple. It is done from the contract. Once you've got the contract selected, either here in the work list or even inside the contract, there's buttons you can click. You're going to confirm execution. And basically what that does is opens up a new service confirmation window. And on that window, what you have to specify then is you go and you add rows for what are those products, what are those materials that you're confirming, what are the quantities. One thing to note that's important around using the service confirmations when it comes to materials is if the item type on the material back in the contract was direct goods issue, processing that through the service confirmation will reduce inventory as you would expect, but any other type of inventory, the system treats it as consumables, so it will not have an impact, it will not reduce inventory. You're just capturing it as if it was a consumable, and for example, on a time and materials basis, you're able to bill for it. This is just a slide for folks out there that maybe have a need. So like say on a fixed price contract that you do want to capture actuals, but your organization doesn't use service confirmations, doesn't make sense to use confirmations, you guys are project based, so you'd like to capture those actuals, but you'd like to capture against the project. So there is a way that you can do that, and the way that it would work is it only works really with a fixed price contract without actuals. And here what that means is that we're not going to be using service confirmations. That's how ByDesign deems the capturing of actuals. So we would set the contract up to be fixed price without actuals. But then you can still create a project and take that project and link it to the cost and revenue assignment on the contract. Now there are some limitations here. There's only two types of projects that you can do that for: direct cost and multi-project customer. Essentially the steps are that you create that project, you release it, with whatever project structure makes sense to you. You would create the contract, you would then link the project or project task to the relevant contract items, and then release the contract. After that point, you can do project time reporting, project time approvals as you normally would. This project is totally a non-billable project because the billing is already handled by the fixed price billing off of the contract. One thing to note, so with that, it does accomplish the goal of capturing the actual work, the cost of the project, and it is possible to have the revenue also reflected. Just note there are some limitations around the revenue recognition when it comes to projects that are attached to the contract, so there may be an involvement there around having to do manual journal entries. But it's quite handy if you are in an organization that wants to use projects and capture those actuals through projects rather than service confirmations. For executing sales orders through to or contracts for product sales through a sales order, really simple to do. Really the main thing here is on your contract, the material that is put onto your contract, it'll have a item type of product contract, and you would save and release the contract as you would any other type of contract. You can set up the renewals, the cancellations, all that kind of stuff. It's all the same. Really, the main thing here is around the item type. You define, the quantity and the price that was agreed over the time frame of this contract, and then after that, it's just a matter of when time comes that your customer needs the product. All you need to do is from the contract, either when it's pulled up here or from the work list, you simply just go and create a new follow-up sales order. And so it'll create a sales order with reference to that contract. So you can see that over here. And it'll essentially, kind of pre-populate in what the outstanding quantity is. So this would have been populated to 10, but we can say the customers, at this time we need order 2, it honors the price. And then we release then the sales order and then just run it through the rest of the outbound logistics process. Once you've, and for folks on the call that are already product-based companies, you'll know, once the outbound rule is created, then it'll create an outbound delivery request for customer invoicing. So really, all that stuff is the same. It's really the main difference here is just on the front end that you can create the contract that will then give you the ability to generate those sales orders with that quantity and pricing over that time period. I think we've talked a lot already about the invoicing of a customer contract. This is just summarizing. So here again, these are 2 fixed price contracts. The main difference here that allowed us to accomplish the upfront billing was that there was no invoice schedule, whereas here there was an invoice schedule. You'll see in customer invoicing, the main difference is this one here generates a customer contract invoice request for the full amount. And this one here will show up as a scheduled invoice request. And that's that background job that runs. So it'll create those as the time horizon 3 days will be configured as that nears. It'll create it. It'll sit there in the customer invoicing work center, ready for your A department to pick up and invoice out to the customer. For time and materials, it'll be a service confirmation invoice request, and then we're going to talk here for the sales orders outbound delivery invoice request. Just 1 or 2 more slides, and then we'll finish it out. When it comes to renewals, I talked about the renewals in this reminder. So on your contract, if you had entered on the renewal agreement area a reminder, let's say 45 days, what the system will do will create that reminder task. So you can see in the upper screenshot here, this is an example of a renewal task that was sent out to the contract administrator, letting them know that this contract is going to be ending on December. It's going to be ending soon, and with that, then depending on the renewal rules, this is really just kind of the task that was created to create that notification. If the renewal rules were not configured to automatically also create a new contract or a quote, then it would be up to the contract administrator to go into the details and follow the manual steps to do that. Or if the rules have been configured to create the follow-on documents and auto-renew them, as you can see in the screenshot down here, we have the 249 contract that the system automatically created, and it created it in preparation status, making it easy for the contract administrator once they get this renewal notification to just drill into it and then start working from this new renewal contract that has all the information copied from the previous contract. In terms of upsells to existing contracts, you would utilize this if you were wanting to, if there was a request or you were selling, additions to an existing contract. It's pretty simple to do. From the contract, you would click on the Actions button over here, and there's an option to create an upsell opportunity. Essentially what that does is it creates a new opportunity with reference to the contract. You can move that opportunity through the quoting process, take that quote, and then once you have acceptance from the customer on that quote, you have the option there that you can take that and move that quote. Here we're seeing in the upper screen, take that quote and create it into, essentially push it into the existing contract. Or alternatively, if you wanted to, you could create a new contract, but the whole reason of doing an upsell into existing is to take the upsell and merge it into the existing contracts. Once you do that, it'll essentially appear as new lines on the contract. And so that's what we see here, how that's all happened. The upsell opportunities moved in as new lines on the contract. So I was going to go through a demo of these scenarios. I'll maybe work with Kayla. Maybe we can provide a recording afterwards that will just walk you through these. I apologize, lots of topics to get through on contracts, but these were the ones that I was going to step through, showing you just the main difference here between, when you use a sort of request, how that might look in like a fixed price contract. This one here would be more like, invoicing for subscription services, just monthly, recurring, quarterly, annually billings, a ton of materials, type of invoicing, and then also showing an example of the sales order outbound invoice delivery. So I apologize for not having enough time to go through that, but I'll work with Kayla and maybe we can provide that in a follow-up video or even handouts to everybody who had registered for the call. So with that, Kayla, that ends the presentation, and I'll just turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Chris. Yeah, and we're right at 1:03, so I'll just let everyone go. Have a great rest of your week for those of you in the US. Happy Thanksgiving for this week. I hope you have a nice low-key Thanksgiving this year. And please join us for next week's supply chain management session. So thank you so much and have a great day.